half of my career I spent working on traditional models, and second half of my career I've worked mostly on the machine learning models or the data-driven models. And I realized how important the machine learning and data science models are, and that is what I'm going to talk about. The topic is AI and machine learning in finance, why and how. So I was listening to a couple of presenters before. There were a lot of good points. My presentation or the topic or the session would be more kind of TED talk. It's more high level, not going into so much of detail, even just 15 minutes. What I'll be talking about is why and how of machine learning and data science. So first part is where I'll talk about why the adoption is needed, why it's really important for traditional banks, why it's important for the industry professionals, and why it is important for the bright future. We want something in future that is why we should try to adopt machine learning. So the first part will answer the why. Then I'll be talking about a couple of barriers to adoption. Some of these are already talked about quite a lot in among finance fraternity. And finally, I'll be talking about how to adopt it. I'll talk about one of the ways of going about adopting machine learning and data science in finance. So yeah, I mean, again, reiterating the fact it might not be very technical, it's kind of high level and more like a TED talk. So going to the next slide, why banks should adopt machine learning and data science. That's why it is important for traditional banks. So, I mean, what we have seen is there is this regime shift that's happening, a paradigm shift happening because of all the growth in the data that we see and the new kind of model coming up, especially in the last 10 years. And finance is not much different. So in terms of what are the advantage of why machine learning and AI should be adopted by banks, the first and foremost thing is adoption and decrease cost, something which is talked about quite a lot. In finance, the focus is definitely on decreasing cost. And of course, automation is something that leads to the decrease in cost. Then the machine learning models, they adapt quickly to the consumer base and their demographic. What I mean by that is just think of fraud detection model. And if the fraudster come up with a new kind of fraud, we need our model to adjust very quickly. So machine learning models are good in that sense. They can quickly take new parameters, and for example that I mentioned of the fraud, they can give the warning sign, adopting the model very, very quickly for a new kind of fraud. So that's one of the reasons. And the third reason is if you don't, then somebody else will. And that is also one of the most important reasons, because fintech firms are coming for all these traditional banks. That is what I'll be focusing on in the next slide. So if you look at what's happening in the world of fintech, so there are a couple of AI-based fintech firms which are valued much more than 100 years old retail and investment banks. So for example, Ant Financial, which is an AI-based fintech firm, it is valued 150 billion, and that was in 2018, and it was much ahead of all these big banks, Goldman and Barclays. So there is a competition which is going to come, or there will be a problem for all these big banks if they don't adopt AI and machine learning. On the right-hand side, you see the chart where it's the total valuation that we see for all these fintech firms versus the big banks, which have been existing since last hundreds of years. So the market cap for the fintech firms are close to 1 trillion, and that was in 2020. And it was much more compared to what's the market valuation for all these big banks, which is close to 880 billion. And it was all these Goldman, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citi, all these big banks combined together. So fintech firms, and especially AI-based fintech firms, they are coming up. And what might happen to these traditional banks? They might kind of become irrelevant or fade away if they don't adopt AI, or if they don't do what's happening or what all these fintech firms are doing. So that's for the traditional banks. Now talking about the industry professionals, I've talked to quite a lot of quants and a lot of people, and everybody's kind of worried about jobs being gone. Automation is coming and AI is coming, the jobs will be gone. That's true. But what's automation? Automation is pretty much the adoption of AI. Right? So The jobs, definitely, the repetitive jobs might go, which might be taken away by AI. And the new jobs will be coming up, and those jobs will be AI and machine learning. So you see all these news articles. Yes, the jobs are growing. On the left-hand side, you see the article from Business Insider, which says that 2020 can be really bad year for Wall Street. But on the right-hand side, you see that there are new jobs coming up. There are new jobs coming in machine learning and AI. And this article from CNBC suggests that the jobs in AI it has increased last 60, in the last year, and that was I think 2021. So that's one of the reasons why industry professionals should try to reinvent themselves, try to adopt machine learning and data science and AI. This is something I like quite a lot. Why we need to adopt, and that is something we need to adopt it for bright future. There's this line from Elon Musk, which I like quite a lot. Your will is more accurate way to predict the future. And that holds for AI in finance and banking as well. So let's talk about one of the scenarios. Let's think of the unbanked people across the world. So especially in the third world country, there are a lot of unbanked people, around 50% in some cases. And let's take a scenario of an illiterate farmer in the third world country who's unbanked. And how can we use AI and machine learning to make sure that he's onboarded and he has a bank account? So for having a bank account, you need to, first and foremost, consumer onboarding. You need to make sure, or you need to ensure that there is this onboarding and you need to come up with ways for onboarding. The second thing, at times when you're giving loans to people, you need to understand their credit worthiness. So for an illiterate farmer in the third world country who is living miles away, how can you use AI and machine learning? So first thing is signing of contract for onboarding. How do you ask or how do you get the person to sign the contract? So AI can convert text to speech in the language that farmer understands. And once farmer or that illiterate guy understands about or understands the contract, there's a thing called vocal signature in AI. The voice has its own modulation which can act as a signature. So that person can sign by his or her vocal signature, and this can be done millions of miles away, even if the person can be present. So AI can definitely help in the onboarding. The second part is credit worthiness. Somebody in a third world country, let's say, who's in bank, there's a great chance that the person might not have his or her credit score. So credit score is based on some typical parameters, your income, your age, and stuff like that. But if parameters don't hold, the person doesn't have credit worthiness. How can you use AI machine learning? So you can come up with new parameters which can be customized to each and every individual, such as that. For this case, when there's a farmer, it can be farm area, crop sales, climate. And in terms of affordability, you can come up with the different parameters, whether that person has mobile, whether that person can travel, what is social network, networking presence on social networking websites. And based on all these things, and of course, AI can help in two ways. First and foremost thing, maybe taking the picture of farm area and converting it into a parameter. And the second thing is the model can adapt very quickly, as I mentioned before, to all these new parameters. So it's just an example of a farmer. Same thing can be possible for people with different professions. For example, all these creative guys who have YouTube channel for their credit worthiness, AI machine learning can take new parameters, so the number of followers, and that's where it can be used. So AI can solve big problems. Related to one of the examples that I mentioned was making sure that the number of unbanked people are less, but there can be numerous such problems that can be solved, and that's why AI will definitely lead to a bright future. Now, when you talk about barriers to adoption, again, I mean, these are a couple of things which are talked about quite a lot. And one of the things is outdated infrastructure. People don't want to move. They have a lot of resistance, a lot of inertia. And the second thing is denial. Now, that is something I've seen quite a lot as well. So what people think that AI is not a big deal. The disruption is not visible. People think that like, ignorance is bliss. That's kind of mentality of so that's what denial is. And then there are a lot of misconception and excuses. Some of these might be true, but in some cases it might be misconception. So people think that AI adoption of AI and machine learning is really, really hard. It's hard, but it's not that hard. When you say that a lot of skill set is needed, the skill set required in finance might not be as difficult or as much as what's needed for the cutting edge work which is going on in, let's say, computer vision or self-driving cars. The skill set might be different, but that's the skill set is less as compared to what's needed for the hardcore AI and machine learning. Then there is this point about AI and machine learning being a black box. To some extent, it's true. There is issue of interpretability and explainability. But the argument from me would be, or the general argument for adoption would be that in case for driving license, you need to ask the person to know each and everything about car, the chemical composition of the fuel used or how the engine works. The person might not be able to get the driving license and might not be able to drive the car at all, to end up driving a bike throughout his life. So interpretability is important, but we need to draw a line there. Okay, this is the point beyond which we might not care about interpretability so much. So that's one of the excuses or misconception that is something I've seen. And another one is that a lot of data is needed. Again, it's true to some extent for AI and machine learning. At times, for some of the use cases, a lot of data is needed. But there are many use cases in which the data required might not be so much. You might be fine with using the same data which you're using for the traditional models. So that's about some of the barriers to adoption. We're talking about how banks can reinvent themselves. And this is like just 3 points. Of course, there are a lot of other points, but there are 2 approaches. One is top-down and bottom-up. So top-down is the leaders need to step up for the change. They need to realize that, okay, this is some sort of misconception, this is something of denial, or he needs to move from the legacy system, and that will flow from top to bottom. The second one is bottom-up approach, where you educate and reinvent the workforce. You make sure that the people at the junior people, they are doing courses, they are doing materials and content of AI and machine learning. That's more organic because it will also flow up to the top, and they might come up with ideas to implement machine learning and data science. And of course, the third point is that we need to identify and understand the misconception and excuses. So that is something I talked about in the slide before. Now, reinventing the workforce. So that this is something related to the bottom-up approach, and that is what I'll be focusing on. This is what the reinventing the workforce is about. People need to go through the courses, people need to go through the content. And when I was looking at the content available, and it's also based on some of the discussion I had with a couple of folks who are working in machine learning. There are some gaps, there are definitely some gaps. So the gaps are threefold. One is that the material is either too theoretical or too general. What I mean by that is that materials are either very high level, that things are going to change in the future, and machine learning is going to make big impact, or they are very theoretical in the sense that there are a lot of equations and a lot of code, people get lost. So we need to stick the right balance. We need to have something which is kind of practical. Then the second point is that content is not very much customized to finance. Finance is like a different animal altogether. Why? Because we have the different sort of problems here. We need to deal with the interpretability, we need to deal with the high noise to signal ratio. So it's not the general AI machine learning that we have for other areas, computer vision and all, might not be very much suitable for finance. Of course, we can borrow from there, but there needs to be some customization in there. Or there needs to be some customization in machine learning, finance, or AI. And also the focus should be on practicality, on implementation. That is something is a kind of a gap here in terms of the content available. I'm not saying that there are not good books. There are really good books, really good content, really good courses available. But there are a few gaps that people need to address in case they want to implement the course and focus on the bottom of the course. So coming to this slide, and this might feel like a product placement in between a good YouTube video, but what I'm saying is I'm just going to talk about the book that we wrote. And the point here is not to just advertise the book. The point here is you can read any material, you can read any course, you can do any certification, but make sure that whatever the course and material you're focusing on, that's number one, practical, and number two, that's customized to finance. What happens at times is that when you go for reading artificial intelligence and machine learning material, you get lost because there are a lot of things happening and we feel that it might not be applicable, it might not be relevant to the things that we are doing. So just talking about the book, we have tried to make it practical, and we have tried to customize it to machine learning. There are like 20 plus case studies. Along with their Python code, they have covered almost all the areas of machine learning, fraud detection, and credit scoring, and a lot of other case specific. Right? So I'm trying to cover exhaustive set of areas of machine learning in here, supervise and supervise, postman. There's this plug and play master template, which is pretty much like auto and you can plug in the data and the code will run by itself. You can do the tuning and do the. And then of course the final point is something which is pretty important, that it's customized to clients. So again, reiterating the same point, in case the banks want to have this bottom approach, where they want to train the employees, they want to make sure that the people are ready, which is more organic way of going about adoption. They should make sure that people are reading the right content, the right, and then it's customized to clients. Not marketing my book, go for any content, but focus on customization and practicality. So leaving with the final thought, which is that machines are coming, and the banks, industry professionals, they need to reinvent themselves before it's too late. So that's pretty much it for me. Happy to take any questions, and here is my LinkedIn profile, and this one want to reach out to me.